Today, we're breaking down how to use Mass Change 2, how to win with it, and the lines that your opponent will try to fight it. Now, if you haven't been playing this current meta, I'm going to give you guys a couple of extra cards to help you guys catch up. One is going to be Triple Tactics Talent, just because it's monster heavy format. You're going to be able to use this like 90% of the time, whether you're going first or second. Second card is Evenly Matched. If you activate this and resolve it, it's a straight blowout, and you can use it to bait crime. But the third card, hand trap of choice right now, aside from like the Bestial stuff, is Ghost Spell, because it can stop the Bestial stuff. So you can, if you're going for a game, you don't have to worry about your opponent dropping a random Bestial Druid Swarm onto you and just kind of throwing your whole board into a whack. Oh, and the Ghost Spell can also stop the Dark World Fusion spell. And those are the stuff that you should already know. So let's go into the Mass Change 2. This card contributed to a lot of my success against Tearlament Ishizu, as well as a little bit of Dark World. Now for Tearlament Ishizu, currently tournament-wise 5-0. I'm so happy about that, especially playing Sprites of all deck, and I'm going to be delivering this part of the segment with a little bit of like Sprite example, but you guys can reapply it to your own decks. First of all, let's talk about the things that, putting Dark Law cancels out, so you can kind of understand the line that, your opponent will go through just to get rid of it, as well as talk about the natural counters that they will have. So, of course, it's the stuff that they don't have access to, any of the fusions, because aside from instant fusion, they're not putting anything on board because most of their fusion effects are coming from their Dark Aqua monsters. But they can't hit the graveyard, so that's no problem. And even if they activate Kelbeck or a Yugioh and they want to mill cards, chaining your Mass Change 2 will essentially make them lose 5 cards permanently, which is pretty good. But this doesn't automatically end their game. They have stuff they can pivot around. There are stuff that they can do to get rid of Dark Law, and I just want to make sure you guys don't fall into those little traps that could completely just ruin your game, because committing to Dark Law does require quite a few cards, and coming from Sprites is pretty easy, because once you summon out the Sprite Blue, you get to add a card, therefore you can pay the cost of Mass Change 2 quite easily, because it just comes from the Sprite Elf, and Sprite Elf is also contributing to a huge part of this as well. Now in terms of natural counters, well, there's attack-based counters and there's targeting-based counters that you have to keep in mind. And if they do put additional bodies onto the field, they're going for an attack-based counter. So if they go into Baguska, they're pivoting so that you go into defense mode, and maybe they'll get rid of Baguska just so that they can attack over your 1800 defense, which isn't significantly strong. If you accidentally send a card into the graveyard, they might use Kelbeck, special summon Kelbeck. Of course, they target your Dark Law, and your Dark Law gets bounced. So they're not out of options. This isn't like a complete free win-all, but if you know the lines that your opponent can go through, you can counter each of these. Soliak also takes a little bit of time because they can set it, and then they can target your Dark Law to negate your Dark Law. And at that point, it would really suck because they get to also perform a fusion because they're sending a Tearlament monster into the graveyard. And yeah, basically it goes downhill from there. So other things they can do, such as Mudora or I believe Keldo, they can special summon them out. But what's the point? It's so that they can get extra bodies to go into rank 4, so they can get to either Baguska, or they're using it for a tribute summon of a Bestial monster. And speaking of the Bestial monsters are naturally stronger than your Dark Law. So if they put out a Bestial monster, and likely you're going to have a Dark monster in the graveyard for them to actually just bring out or banish because you set it up before the Dark Law, right? It's natural. So those particular lines seems like they have natural outs, as well as Tearlament Scream, which would reduce the attack of your Dark Law. So they can basically go into, I would say, lowering it by 500, put you at 19. They're still going to need to go into Baguska, but they can go into Baguska in attack mode and just run you over. But remember, while Dark Law is on the field, they're not going to commit a lot of resources that would throw stuff into the graveyard, because right now they can't benefit, they can't advance their game state in that main phase 1. So likely they're going to jump into battle phase a lot sooner than you think. Oh, and beware of triple tag. So if you need to activate any of your effects that are essential, try to do it before the main phase. So to kind of keep it short, what do I do? First things first, I like to shotgun the Mass Change 2 90% of the time. It's just so effective when you do it like that, because you don't load them with a graveyard. So if they don't get a Tearlament monster name in the graveyard, that is actually very, very key, because that means the Perlo Reno and the Mudora or the Keldo shuffle back will not be able to get you a pop. So essentially you're cutting them off of their options. And the second thing that you should be working on is preventing yourself from being destroyed by battle. So Magnemite, Druid Swarm, they're all very strong, and Druid Swarm in particular also has a targeting effect that sends it away. You need targeting prevention. That's why targeting prevention is so essential when it comes to building this particular board. I get that you can counter your opponent by like chaining the Mass Change 2, make them banish a bunch of cards, but if they land some of these essential cards into the graveyard, you're kind of screwed. So essentially always try to get Mass Change 2 on the field as soon as possible. If they're using Sharon, then that's a good thing. If you're using Sharon, you can just immediately just activate it, chain to it, so that they don't load the Tearlament name into the graveyard, and that's going to keep you alive longer. Of course, they can try to pivot, right? They can pivot into Baguska. If they go into Baguska, you'll be put into defense mode, but that's okay, because at least they're going to be passing turn back to you. And if they go into battle phase, essentially you need a removal for the Magnum or the Jerusalem that's going to be attacking into the Dark Law. And coming from a sprite perspective, I'm just going to activate Smashers, get rid of the monster, and they're going to main phase 2 with the Dark Law still intact. And that's going to be really, really bad for your opponent. Now, that's where Kelbeck comes in. Kelbeck is still effective that turn after, unless of course I still have the Sprite Elf, and the Sprite Elf is still there. The Kelbeck is more or less useless because they can't really do anything, and I just got to remake my Sprite Elf, and I essentially can go for an OTK at this point. So usually they go into scoop phase, but just keep in mind that as long as you're able to keep that Dark Law alive, they're going to struggle even just to add cards into their hand without you getting rid of their resources along the way. And that's essentially what you got to do. You have to have a board removal and have some way to prevent you from getting hit by targeting effects, because your opponent is not going to commit any resources until that Dark Law is gone. And also, here's the thing. Going first, I do recommend playing Mass Change 2. Going second, if you're forced to go second, don't play the Mass Change 2, obviously. Side in stuff like Defissure. It's funny enough, Defissure warrants your opponent to immediately react to it. Unless, of course, they have Pearl of Reno. If they have Pearl of Reno, then they won't really care, because all they gotta do is do one shuffle back move and they can pop it. But essentially, it will force them to activate Crime, as the Rolkalos and the Rhino Hearts, they will not be able to revive themselves out of the graveyard, which is pretty painful for them, as well as anything that they try to do to mill to get additional fusions will not work. So the board is much easier to answer when you have a Defissure. So Defissure is kind of like my pivot for Dark Law, so that I can actually do something against my opponent, and I am going for a different kind of play. While I'm playing sprites, what I'm doing to my opponent is I'm trying to Mosquito OTK them. I'm trying to minimize the amount of stuff they can remove off of my board, and I want as minimal graveyard interaction as possible. I've actually killed a lot of people with a Mosquito just because they decided to boost the crap out of the Rolkalos, and I'm like, okay, I can put 4 monsters on board, turn 2 of them into the Mosquito, go into battle phases, and then attack for game. And I was like, wow, that was a lot easier than I thought. So there are mistakes that people are making because they're not accounting for it. A lot of my kills against these big decks right now, they're mainly because of them forgetting that Mosquito is a card and getting punished because I OTK them because they leave big monsters on board. Now, before I jump into Majesty Screen, guys, check out MSTmerch.com. We have our final year-end sale happening right now. You can pick up MST merch for much cheaper than your usual cost. So check out MSTmerch.com for your sleeves, box dividers. Guys, if you're going to be sorting your collection over the holidays, box dividers and subdividers are the best way to do it, hands down. I'll show you my collection in a future video. And yeah, check out MSTmerch.com. Appreciate you guys. It really helps with this channel, and you guys are going to be loving the stuff. Okay, as for my findings against Dark World, okay, so it's still very good, but definitely not as effective, say, against Ishizu Tier. Number one being that, hey, this monster is not going to work on its own. If you're going to be summoning Dark Law on its own on turn 1, it's totally not worth it. Go for a different line. If you're going to be Prosperitying into a card and you see a Mass Change 2, don't go for it if you can't really back up the Dark Law. It's complete waste because you're going to have to eat monsters like Danger Monsters. Bigfoot and Thunderbird both can run over Dark Law, no problem. So if you're going to go for a one-on-one scenario, this is not worth it. But what makes Dark Law so effective is that there's multiple ways to protect it. Even against a Shizu Tier, you can set it up with a Toad next to it. You can set it up so that you have an IP Masquerena. And IP Masquerena is a lot more effective against the Dark World matchup because of these big beatstick monsters. Because you can essentially just summon out an Avermax to absorb the attack, and that is going to be really, really important, because if you don't, you're going to get blown out of the water. But there's also one thing that you can't really do against this matchup, is that if you do go for the IP Masquerena play with the Sprite, whatever, and you have like a Banish, that's great. You have removal, you have attack absorption, and you can keep the Banish up. You could win, but the problem is that if they bait you into activating IP Masquerena, and then they basically go into another Bigfoot effect and they get that Bigfoot discarded, then your Dark Law is going to get popped, and rather than going into the battle phase, your opponent is going to go hardcore Dark World play and you're going to die. So double Bigfoot might become a problem, especially when you can get baited. And yeah, there's not really much you can do about that. And there's also like other counters like Dark Ruler No More, which is a pretty common counter against these matchups. But a lot of people don't favor using Dark Ruler No More just because they're basically gonna give you another turn anyway. And if you didn't overcommit into these Dark Law plays, then you're going to be able to make a recovery, and they need to build a full board against you. So not the easiest thing, but if they do have the full counter, then they have the full counter. If someone uses evenly matched, typically if it's evenly matched, I'd kill off everything but the Dark Law, simply because they are going to struggle to play against you a bit more. But essentially that's like kind of like the Dark World matchup. If they have Imperm, which is really odd because no one really plays Imperm right now, but if they find some way to negate Dark Law and just play through it, then you just got to let them have it, because they probably would have played through your regular board anyway. That's it for this video, guys. If you guys haven't tried out Master Chain 2 in a deck that runs Dark, I highly recommend it. It could just win you games. It's that impactful. I even tried it in Dark World, where it's really good because you have an attack magnet in the rank 8s of Hope Harbinger. You can negate stuff with, say, Grapha, or rather change the effect of cards with Grapha. It's really just all-round effective. That's what I would like to say. But in terms of the next Metatron video, I'm going to talk about stuff that I've been buying, preparing for the next format. I'm super invested into Kashtira. You guys have no idea. Nishi hates me talking about it. My buddy Phil hates me talking about it. But I've already proxied the deck. I've already play tested the deck a lot. So yeah, look forward to that, I guess. And I know how to break my own boards. I know how things extend into weird boards. Even if you get hit by Nibiru, you can keep playing. Enough about me talking about that. I'll save that for the next video. Thank you guys for watching. Check out MSTmerch.com. Love you all. Happy holidays. And I'll see you guys in the next one.